My name is Paige Harlow. I'm 36 years old. I work in medical billing, and until the day a contractor opened my attic hatch and found a bed up there, I thought the worst thing about inheriting an old house was the paperwork. I was wrong. The paperwork was annoying, sure. The probate forms, the duplicate keys, the insurance calls, the endless little signatures you have to produce every time someone learns a property changed hands because somebody died. But paperwork is honest. It tells you exactly what it is. It wants dates, initials, copies, and patience. What I found in that attic was not honest. It had been living above my head for months, maybe longer, while I moved room to room downstairs, thinking I was alone. The house had belonged to my Aunt Marion. Technically, she was my mother's first cousin, but in our family, the titles stretched and softened around whoever actually showed up, and Aunt Marion showed up a lot. She never married, never had children, and spent 40 years in the same narrow two-story house at the edge of Belmore Heights, a neighborhood full of maples, cracked sidewalks, and homes just old enough to have opinions. She taught third grade for most of her life, wore house dresses like they were formal wear, and believed in keeping spare batteries in every room because panic starts small. When she died, everyone expected the house to go to my mother, but my mother had been gone 5 years by then, and I was the closest thing left to a daughter Marion ever had. So, in a sentence tucked into the middle of her will, between a church donation and a line about her jewelry, she left it to me. The house, the furniture, the dishes. The little blue vase she kept on the hall table with fake peonies in spring and real branches in winter. All of it. At first, I didn't even want it. My husband, Evan, had left 8 months earlier, and I was still living in the weird, embarrassed half-light of a marriage that had ended without enough drama to feel justified and without enough kindness to feel survivable. He had not cheated, not in the technical way. He had simply detached one thoughtful silence at a time until one day I realized I was having entire evenings with a man who reacted to me like a hotel guest reacts to lobby music. So when Aunt Marion's lawyer told me about the house, I heard only burden. One more thing to sort through. One more place full of memory. One more building that expected me to become decisive while I still felt like a woman standing in the smoke after a small private fire. But then I went there, and the moment I stepped inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not peace. That would be too simple. Possibility. The house smelled like cedar, dust, old books, and lemon oil. It had narrow hardwood stairs with a dip in the center from decades of feet, tall windows with deep sills, and a little breakfast nook off the kitchen where afternoon light fell in a way that made even silence feel inhabited. The wallpaper in the dining room was atrocious. The bathroom fixtures looked like they had survived a naval battle. The attic insulation probably predated common sense, but the bones were good, and I was tired enough to mistake good bones for a personality trait in both houses and men. So I moved in, not all at once. At first, I split my time between my apartment and the house, bringing over boxes in my trunk and pretending I was transitioning rather than stalling. Then the lease on the apartment ended, and I had to choose. So I painted the front bedroom, changed the locks, moved my mattress into what had been Marion's sewing room, and started the slow, ordinary process of making inherited space tolerate my existence. That process is messier than people admit. You don't simply move into a dead woman's house. You negotiate with it. You decide which lamp stays because it's useful, and which one goes because it keeps making you think you hear her in the hallway. You find recipe cards tucked into hymnals. You find old cough drops in purses. You find Christmas wrapping paper from 1998. and a coffee mug with a chipped handle that no one should still be emotionally attached to, and yet you are. And then, in my case, you start hearing little things at night. Not horror movie things. No footsteps pacing overhead. No child singing in another room. Nothing cinematic enough to tell anyone without sounding like you wanted attention. Just small disturbances. The attic hatch in the upstairs hall was the kind you reached with a pull string, a square panel in the ceiling with a folding ladder behind it. Marion never used the attic for anything but old school things, which could have meant paper snowflakes, or standardized testing binders, or the body of a former principal, depending on tone. I had never gone up there because I hate ladders and because the hatch sat right outside the bathroom, and every time I looked at it, I mentally assigned it to later. Later, in adult life, is where entire disasters breed. The first strange thing was the dust. I noticed it in the upstairs hallway about 3 weeks after moving in. A faint gray scatter on the runner rug beneath the attic hatch. Not enough to panic over, just enough to frown at. I assumed mice in the insulation or old plaster shifting and vacuumed it up. 2 nights later, more dust. Then came the sound. A soft bump overhead around 1 a.m. Not directly above my room, more like above the hall and front bedroom. A careful, contained sound. The kind you hear when something light gets set down or nudged. I lay in bed, with my eyes open, listening to the house settle around it. And because I was newly single in an old house with too many corners and not enough male ego pretending to protect me, I told myself what women tell themselves constantly in order to function. It's probably nothing. The thermostat clicked weirdly. The maple branches scraped the siding when the wind shifted. Radiators pinged. Houses spoke, old houses especially. If I jumped at every small sound, I'd never sleep again. So I kept living there. I worked from home 3 days a week, which should have made me more aware of the rhythms of the place. But familiarity is a dangerous sedative. Once you decide a house is safe, your mind starts filing strange things under manageable categories. The back door I was sure I locked but found unlatched one morning. I must have been distracted. The kitchen stool slightly angled out from the counter. I probably did that while carrying groceries. The half-empty box of crackers I could have sworn was full, stress eating, and forgetfulness. The missing flashlight from the junk drawer, maybe still packed. Each thing alone was nothing. That's how patterns stay hidden. They rely on being individually explainable. I had been in the house just under 3 months when the roof leak started. Not a dramatic leak, just a brown watermark blooming in the ceiling corner of the second floor guest room after a week of heavy rain. Enough to force action, enough to bring a contractor into the story. The contractor's name was Luis Ortega, recommended by my neighbor, Mrs. Levin, across the street, who trusted only 3 people in the world: her dentist, her late husband, and Luis. He was in his 40s, wore work boots like they had union seniority, and had the sort of calm, practical energy that makes you tell a stranger too much about your house in the first 10 minutes. He walked the exterior, checked the flashing, then came inside to look at the watermark. Probably coming from the roofline near the attic side, he said, "I need to see up there." My stomach did a tiny, ridiculous twist. Up in the attic? Yeah. I smiled in what I hoped was a normal homeowner way. I actually haven't been up there yet. Luis looked at me, then at the hatch in the hall ceiling. "Well," he said, "today's your lucky day." It was not. He pulled the string. The hatch dropped with a soft clap, and the folding ladder unfolded halfway before he tugged it fully down. A smell came with it immediately. Not animal. Not insulation. Something stale and human and faintly sweet, like old detergent trapped in heat. I noticed it. then immediately doubted myself for noticing it. Luis climbed first with a flashlight between his teeth. He got maybe halfway onto the attic floorboards before he stopped moving. Not long, maybe 2 seconds, but long enough that my own body tightened. Then he leaned down into the hatch opening and said, in a voice gone flat with surprise, "Ma'am." I stepped into the hall. "Yeah?" He looked at me strangely. Then he asked, "Why is there a bed up here?" There are sentences that enter the room and immediately erase every reasonable explanation you have been using to survive. That was one. "My what?" "A bed," he repeated. "Mattress, blanket, pillow. There's a whole setup." My hands went cold so fast, I actually pressed them against my jeans. "That's not possible," I said. He looked back up into the attic, then down at me again, like he was trying to decide whether he had just discovered a crime or a woman with an odd decorating strategy. "It's possible," he said. "I'm looking at it." I don't remember deciding to climb the ladder. One second I was in the hall, the next I was barefoot on the first rung, with my heart pounding so hard it made the wood vibrate under me. Luis held the flashlight steady and shifted aside enough for me to pull myself up into the attic. The space was bigger than I expected, triangular and hot even in October, floored in old wide planks with insulation tucked into the eaves. Marion's old school things were there. Yes, boxes of worksheets, Christmas tubs, a broken floor lamp, 3 dining chairs too ugly to keep but too sturdy to throw out. And near the far wall, under the sloped part of the roof, was a bed. Not a real bed frame. A twin mattress on the floor with a fitted sheet, a navy blanket folded back, and 2 pillows in mismatched cases. Beside it sat an empty water bottle, a battery lantern, a crate turned sideways as a table, a paperback novel face down, and a ceramic mug with a lipstick stain on the rim. I stared at the mug first. Not because it was the most important thing there, because it made the whole scene domestic in a way that made my skin crawl. A mug meant lingering, repetition, a person who expected to come back. Luis moved his flashlight slowly across the attic. "There's more," he said quietly. He pointed toward the far corner. A duffel bag, a little portable fan, protein bars, a shoebox full of receipts, and hung from one exposed rafter with the kind of careful economy only someone trying not to take up visible space would use, a row of clothes, shirts, jeans, a gray hoodie, socks clipped to a string with clothespins. Somebody had been living above me. Not visiting, not hiding once. Living. I made a sound that was half breath, half gasp, and stumbled backward enough that Luis caught my elbow. "Hey!" That one word grounded me just enough to keep from throwing up. "Do not touch anything," I said, though my voice shook so badly it sounded like someone else had said it through me. Luis nodded instantly. "You need to call the police." I did. I climbed back down the ladder like I was learning stairs for the first time, stood in my own hallway under the open attic hatch, and told a dispatcher that someone had been staying in the attic of my house. Even saying it out loud felt absurd, childishly melodramatic, like the kind of sentence true crime podcasts build merch around. The dispatcher did not laugh. "Are you safe now?" "I don't know," I said, because I didn't. Whoever had been up there might be gone, or downstairs, or watching from the backyard, or at work and planning to come back tonight to their hidden room above my bathroom. "Leave the house," she said. "Wait outside. Officers are on the way." Luis came out with me without hesitation. He locked the front door behind us, which felt both useful and almost insulting in its simplicity, and we stood on the walkway while I tried to breathe normally in a body that had apparently decided normal was no longer available. Mrs. Levin, naturally, appeared on her porch in under 90 seconds. What happened? I said. Someone's been in my attic, and watched her face go from nosy to vindicated horror. That was when I realized she had probably been trying to tell me my house was strange for weeks in the coded way neighbors do, and I had been too polite or too proud to hear it. Police came in 2 cars. They cleared the house, then the attic, then the yard. No person, no immediate danger, just evidence. The younger officer, Officer Bell, came back out carrying a clear evidence bag with one item in it: a key. My breath caught because I recognized it instantly, not to the house, to my old apartment building. I stared at it through the plastic and felt the whole story shift, because there were not many people on Earth who had ever had access to that key. Me and my ex-husband, Evan. Officer Bell said, "You know it?" "Yes," I said, slowly. "That's from my old apartment." "Who else had one?" "My husband," I said, automatically, then corrected myself. My ex-husband. The detective assigned to the case arrived about 20 minutes later. Detective Weller, early 50s, square shoulders, tired eyes, the kind of person who listens without pretending not to be judging the available stupidity in a situation. He asked me to walk him through the timeline from the beginning. I told him about moving in, the odd dust, the noises, the latch, the missing flashlight. As I spoke, every small thing I had explained away came back altered by new context. No longer quirks, signs. My own life revised in real time. Weller asked if anyone besides me had keys to the house. I said no at first. Then I remembered. A week after I moved in, Evan had come by to help with boxes. We were in that nasty post-divorce limbo, where he still spoke like the door to my life hadn't fully closed, and I still hadn't learned how much cruelty hides inside men who say they only want to be there for you. He carried 2 boxes upstairs, fixed a sticking kitchen drawer, and at one point asked to use the bathroom. He had been alone in the hallway for maybe 3 minutes. The attic hatch was in that hallway. I went cold all over again. "Your ex ever have access after the divorce?" Weller asked. "Not officially," I said, "but maybe enough." That evening, the police inventoried the attic. The duffel contained men's clothes in Evan's size. The receipts were from a grocery store 3 blocks away and a gas station near his office. The paperback novel was one I had bought for him 2 Christmases earlier. The mug with the lipstick stain turned out not to be lipstick. It was rust from a chipped rim and attic moisture. I don't know why that mattered to me, except that I had briefly imagined another woman in the attic and felt almost grateful when the horror simplified back into one man. Then they found the notebook. It was tucked into the shoebox under the receipts. Black, spiral-bound. My stomach dropped the second Detective Weller opened it and flipped past the first few pages. It was not a diary exactly. It was a log, dates, times, notes. Page left 8:13, back 5:42. Neighbor across street watches too much. Basement light off by 11:20. Contractor truck Tuesday. Noises downstairs after 1 o'clock /bathroom/phone call crying. Still in blue robe. That last one nearly broke me. Still in blue robe. The robe in question was mine. A faded navy robe I wore most mornings because it belonged to no one but me. The sentence was so small and intimate and observational that it made my own skin feel public. He had not just been sleeping above me, he had been listening, timing me, cataloging my life from overhead like I was a wildlife pattern and not a woman trying to survive a divorce and an inherited house. Detective Weller looked at me and asked very carefully, "Do you want to call him before we do?" "No," I said instantly. He nodded like he had hoped I'd say that. The search for Evan didn't take long. He was at work, still employed, still going to meetings, still wearing pressed shirts and talking about software integrations and quarterly targets while his used socks hung from a line in my attic. When they brought him in for questioning, he did what I think many women reading this will recognize immediately. He started reasonable, not shocked, not innocent, reasonable. According to the interview summary I later saw, he admitted staying in the attic occasionally. He said he was under financial strain after the divorce, that he needed time, that the house had been empty at first, and then it became easier to stay than to explain. He insisted he was never going to hurt me. He said he felt closer there. He said he didn't know how to let go. He said the attic was temporary. Temporary. The word made me laugh when the detective told me. Not because it was funny, because men like Evan always describe trespass like weather, like it happened around them, like it was a phase the room entered. Then the interview shifted because Detective Weller had the notebook, and suddenly, temporary looked less like desperation and more like deliberate concealment. Evan had taken one of Marion's old side yard gate keys from the kitchen junk drawer the day he helped with boxes. He used that to access the backyard and basement door. The basement door lock was old, and according to the locksmith later, laughably easy to bypass with a duplicated key, blank, and patience. Once inside, he'd wait until I slept, then go up to the attic, using the hallway hatch. At times he knew I showered or ran the vacuum or left for work. He had brought the mattress up in pieces over several visits. Several visits. That phrase mattered because it meant planning. Labor, persistence. Not one deranged impulse. An entire arrangement built intentionally above my head. When Weller asked why, finally, plainly, Evan said, "I wanted to see if she ever missed me when she thought she was alone." I sat with that sentence for a long time after the detective repeated it, not because it surprised me, because it was so heartbreakingly small compared to the enormity of what he had done. He wanted evidence of my grief. He wanted to harvest my privacy as proof of love. He had turned the space above my hallway into an observation post for my sadness. That was worse than if he had just hated me. He was charged, not dramatically enough for television, but enough. Unlawful entry, stalking, covert surveillance-related counts through the notebook and occupancy pattern, and a handful of property crimes tied to access and concealment. His lawyer tried to soften it into emotional instability and marital confusion. The prosecutor, thankfully, had no patience for grown men sleeping in rafters to monitor ex-wives. People always ask whether I knew deep down. The answer is yes and no. I knew something was wrong. I did not know wrong could look like a man hanging shirts from attic beams and writing down the hours I wore my blue robe. That is the hardest part to explain after the fact. Once the truth is obvious, everyone wants your intuition to have been obvious too. But intuition is not a courtroom transcript. It's dust under a hatch, a bump at 1 a.m., a latch slightly moved, a feeling that the house is listening. And most women, if they responded to every faint warning exactly as if it were fact, would never be allowed to function in the world. We are trained to downgrade our alarms just enough to get groceries, make payroll, answer emails, keep going. That is how men like Evan survive as long as they do inside other people's blind spots. I didn't stay in the house that night, or the next 4 nights. Mrs. Levin, who had not invited a guest in 17 years, except for one niece with pneumonia, marched me across the street with 2 tote bags and said, "You're sleeping here until that ceiling stops feeling like a second face." It was the kindest thing anyone had done for me in months. From her guest room window, I could see my house. Attic dark, hallway dark, everything ordinary. That made it worse, because ordinary had hidden him. In the weeks that followed, I had the attic professionally cleared, the insulation replaced, every lock changed, every window checked, every crawl space and vent inspected. I found one more thing up there myself before the crew started. A little ceramic bird from Aunt Marion's old side table, tucked near the mattress, like some sad domestic shrine. He had been building a life in fragments of mine and hers, both. I sold the house 6 months later. Not because I had to, because some places don't become safe again just because the person is gone. Some ceilings keep their memory. The buyer was a woman in her 60s, downsizing from a farm with 6 dogs and no patience for romance. She loved the original trim, hated the wallpaper, and said, attics are for storage and regret. I almost told her she had no idea how right she was. Instead, I smiled and signed the papers. I live in a condo now, 3rd floor, no attic, no basement, one front door, one balcony, and neighbors close enough that private grief would have to work much harder to hide from witnesses. Sometimes, very rarely now, I still wake up at night and listen for sounds above me. Then I remember there's nothing there but roof, and I breathe again. So, yes, the contractor opened my attic hatch and asked why there was a bed up there. What he really found was the version of my marriage that had survived the divorce better than I had. The part that still believed love was entitlement, that access could be taken if it was not granted, that watching counted as closeness. I thought inheriting that house meant I had been left a place to start over. Instead, for a while, it became the place where I learned the final truth about the man I had married. He did not want me back. He wanted to remain above me, unseen, long after I had started trying to live.